Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome back to another special episode. Like that, I put on my deep voice. That means it's going to get serious. It's going to get a little bit heavy. Jim, welcome back to the show.
Robbie, good to see you again.
It's been a bit. It's been what, a couple hundred episodes, I think now. I think it's been a full year.
Oh, no idea.
Okay.
No idea. It's all gone in a blur for me.
Yeah, I don't really keep track of time. It's kind of like when someone asks what my age is, I'm just like, I don't know, like 142 months. They're like, what is that? Like 12? And I'm like, I don't know.
To be honest, I'm writing a book at the moment, and time has no meaning anymore. Day, night, anything, it's all gone.
What's the book about?
Well, it's about walking in the past, moving. It's about movement and the archaeology of movement.
So kind of like what we talked about before. I mean, even being an archaeologist like yourself, you're probably, what would you say your biggest challenge or your biggest kind of, I would say, issue is that you face? Is a lot of it just not being able to determine, I guess, from the evidence that you don't have a lot?
The difficulty with archaeology is that we just don't, we have a really scrappy amount of evidence. It's like, not only are we looking at the remains of somebody, we're looking at the very partial remains of their life, plus we're looking at some weird abstract corner of their life as well, so it's not even complete. And then on top of that, most of the rubbish that they've thrown away is decomposed anyway, so we're only left with the really hard stuff like stone and pottery. And so it's almost, well, it's impossible to completely reconstruct it. And of course, the problem is we can't ask anyone. We're not like anthropologists where we can, talk to people and translate what they're meaning. We just, have such scrappy amounts of evidence. So, when you're doing something like trying to understand how people moved in the past, where, there is no residue really, only the things that movement has impacted, then it's really difficult. Well, it's impossible really. And I'm writing a book on it, a whole book, 60,000 words on stuff that we can very barely get from the archaeological record.
Where are you going to find enough evidence or enough to write about with 60,000 words? I mean, if it's so hard, I understand, like, archaeology to me is one that I've been getting like kind of super fascinated in, only because I think it's interesting to see, like, I was talking to a person who studies like Rome. He's a Rome archaeologist, and he was talking about that a lot of the evidence that they have that's left over is evidence that were based because people that could write stuff down, and people that could write stuff down happen to be people of a higher class. So obviously they're going to leave out maybe crucial details to understand a specific time period. I mean, if we only had a book, which most books are written by like ex-addicts or government people, which are probably addicts that are still happening now. Like, a lot of government people seem like they're doing a line of coke under the, like Jimmy Fallon's doing coke. We all know it. But when they write a book, they're only talking about specific issues that they're facing with, like, oh, it's so hard to get this bill passed, or it's so hard to get this. And it's like, well, what about the fact that gas has gone up basically a whole $2, or all the issues that a lot of people, common people, are facing? Because sadly, it's just not interesting for a lot of people to want to write a book. I was trying to write one. It was going to be called The World's Consensus on Pain. But that's as far as I got, was a title, because I just keep getting into government rants, which isn't good for a book unless like you're into that type of stuff. But I think it's interesting because with archaeology, there's so much that we don't know. And it's funny, as much as you think that you can have it all, like we got it figured out that, a Stonehenge was this. Next thing you know, they're finding other things about the standing stones in the UK. There was just a recent article about how the standing stones, they found something new about that. And it's like, yeah, you're constantly getting like another treasure thrown at you. And the next thing you know, some person from overseas comes over and goes, did you know they were actually over here first? And I have this evidence to prove it. And you're like, well, that throws my whole theory out the window.
Yeah, it's constantly evolving. We're trying to build. I know this is a bit of a cliche, but we're trying to build this jigsaw puzzle, and most of the pieces are missing. And so you put a piece, and it's a little bit blue, and you go, oh, it's the sky, and you come up with these grand theories about how what you're looking at is the sky with a bit of cloud or something. And then you find a few more pieces, and you realise that it's got a boat on it, and it must be the sea. And that's a bit of a cliche, but the point is that everything's evolving, and you've got to just keep adapting every time new bits of information come along. And I think the problem is when you get the really big, the big titans in archaeology, and they get stuck with their theory and they just will not budge from it, even though all of this evidence is coming up at the moment. Around them, they're still not budging from their kind of ideas that they came up with 20 years ago. I'm seeing that right now in history. So you were talking about the historic record and how biased the historic record is because it's written by an elite group or a select group of people with particular concerns which don't necessarily reflect the average person. I'm a prehistorian. I deal with all of the archaeology before the written record. I deal with the Neolithic and the Mesolithic and the Bronze Age. These are really exciting times, but we have so little evidence that we're really kind of casting around to try and build our theories and ideas. And right now we're going through this incredible, really incredible revolution of ancient DNA, of archaeogenetics, they call it. And we're seeing that, we're getting these sort of big influxes of people through prehistory, and that there were kind of like waves of groups of people. And this is new information that's coming in, and it's coming in really quite rapidly at the moment. And lots of people who have built theories around, what henges are, what stone circles are, the meaning of Stonehenge and all of these things. What a lot of those people, the very top level academics, the very, the sort of what we call the big men, the chiefs of archaeology, are not budging from their opinions, and they're not really taking into consideration all this new evidence. I think probably we're about to see a revolution happen where a lot of these older folk kind of retire off, and we start getting a whole new set of theories developing, which include all of this really exciting information. And then there'll probably be a long pause where we get a new tier of elite within archaeology before there's another great revolution and new information comes along and upsets those cherished theories from that lot. So it's quite an exciting time in archaeology, particularly prehistory at the moment. And in terms of understanding people's movements, this whole revolution, this archaeogenetics revolution, is really helping a lot, because that's one way that you can see movement and mobility of people.
So I'm going to say a few things. One thing is, for anybody that's watching the video, and I'm apologizing to you, Jim, in advance, is that there was a connection thing. The sound was going together, but the video you're going to get motion sickness if you try and watch it. It's better now, but before a minute ago, I was blinking so many times. But ancient DNA, go back to that. Is science getting to the point where we can, well, hold on, before I even hit ancient DNA, you threw me off with that, because I'm already thinking like, holy crap, we're going to have ancient genetics in us. Obviously, there's probably some that's left in our DNA, but imagine if you can, you have Norse people. Like, have you seen Norse people that are like 9 feet tall and they're just godly looking? Like, that's primal DNA. That's not what's today. Today is like an evolved form of that, which I would say is kind of downgraded in a sense and probably advanced in others. But I've been coming across this a lot, and I've been really interested in the topic. See, when I was looking up like Neolithic architecture, why do I say archaeology When I was
Archaeology.
looking up Neolithic archaeology and news in that thing, I came across the Stonehenge article. I came across a couple others, but every story was talking about, did you know that the men stayed home and the women went out? And I go, I really hope that someone isn't putting in like society's like ideas into old time beliefs, like, which is a lot that you see with academia, especially there's the Conceptual Penis Project, which is like a person talking. He literally created a fake study to show that institutions weren't even reading the articles anymore. I think his name's Peter Boghossian. He created this study saying that if you had a like eventually your crotch just leads to climate change. That's what they were talking about, and that's what the whole study was about. But they inserted a bunch of key words that based on sex and all these other types of things that institutions would never say no to because they're afraid of how society's like ideas are, that they would have riots in front of their schools. So when I'm seeing articles talking about how like men stayed home and women went out, every single article, I mean 15 in a row, were about women. And I was like, I really hope we're not getting like, they're just not trying to be what I would say woke archaeology, or so this is true.
No, this is completely true, and you know, it's actually the other way around. That, you know, societal, because we live in a patriarchal society, and we have done for quite a few centuries now. But that's not always been the case, and the problem is we put this patriarchal society on prehistory and assumed that when we've seen sort of heroic people moving across, you know, Bronze Age men moving, you know, the Bronze Age people moving across. We've imagined that it would be the men doing the moving. They're the heroes of the story. And actually, we can test that now with archaeology and with stable isotopes, with archaeogenetics. And it's just not true. And what we actually see is, yeah, women are moving. Obviously, women are moving. And in fact, in some settlements and within certain societies, it is mainly the women that are doing the moving. Most of the time, it's a combination of the both, you know, of the two. Men move and women move too. And the same, you know, the same is true. Well, it's true through prehistory. It's true in the Roman world. You know, there's lots of people that have been saying, oh yeah, but women didn't move as much as men. Men did the moving. Well, actually, that's not true. And the evidence is there that women were doing a lot of the moving. And so on through history. So, you know, I think that what this ancient DNA is doing, and other scientific techniques, is actually dispelling some of the modern myths around the primacy of the heroic male, and we're actually, you know, getting to, I think, a greater truth, a better truth of the past.
So it's being more accurate in a sense. I feel like now it's probably highlighting more of the stories that weren't really talked about. Like if you have a narrative or you have a template that fits, much like Call of Duty, most of the old time stories or movies were based on a badass male hero rather than the female. And then it was kind of different to highlight the female. Now it's like, well, there were many male and female, but now you're having all of it get highlighted more now. And when I was coming across 15 articles in a row, I'm good to know that, or I kind of figured that they both moved together. I wouldn't think it was just all one person, but all you ever hear about is one side. So it's nice to have the both sides of those types of things as well too. It just gets a little bit like so many things now, especially when it comes to funding or when it comes to money. A lot of people just want to please the people that are possibly going to be donors of the money. So it's hard to know what's true. And then we go back to like the narrative of things of like someone has a theory and they don't want their theory to be wrong. Well, that ruins history in a sense. No matter if you're working 30 something years, there's a theory out there I told you before I wanted to throw at you. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Have you ever heard of that?
I may well have done. Yeah.
So there's like a couple people that have talked about it. It's kind of been dismissed as a pseudoscience, but there's a lot of people that still believe in this, and there's plenty of evidence to kind of say so. Is that when it comes to climate change or global warming, it's not really a sense of like global warming. It's more of like a freeze, which is like an insta freeze, which has happened throughout history. And they think that a lot of these like remnants that we're finding throughout history, this is where it gets into the like the little bit of like the pseudoscience in a sense, like the ancient pyramids. These all could have been different timelines of humanity humanity evolving in different strengths. So their idea behind it is, from what I've heard and what I've tried to soak in from it, is imagine that there's a whole, like, let's say this is humanity's timeline. If it ended here and we had to reset, like we had to go from a small little microbe back to whatever we are now. We all technically evolved from, I think, shrews or something like that. Um, but if we had to evolve again, so many small little factors, our diets, our lifestyles, all these types of things would change that evolution and set us on a whole different path. So they think that, I know they talked about like people back in the day, for instance, like in the 1900s, the 1800s, they were smaller. Well, it's because their food, they didn't have a whole limited amount of food. I think like the largest male was like 165 or 70 something pounds. And we have people that are borderline 300 pounds at most. Football players in the NFL, especially, those are not really obscure. Sometimes you catch one of those in high school that's like 7 foot tall. You're like, Jesus, you're 15 years old. And the kid's like, yeah. And you're like, what are you eating? He's like, oh, I'm Norse. You're like, all right, yeah, Norse. I got you. It's them Norse genetics. But back to the major point is that if there is this Younger Dryas impact theory, and society has been known to reset based on the Earth resetting itself, like a global freeze and small things survive, and then you have to evolve from there. Ancient pyramids, those possibly could have been from a different timeline where maybe people were bigger and able to carry those things. Like I said, that's where it gets into the pseudoscience. My more of rational belief, or where I fall with it, is that Earth definitely has its resets. It definitely has these time periods where it tries to fix itself or balance out its harmony as well too. Whether those are different timelines, I don't think that bases in a lot of stuff like ancient Egypt, because there's so much evidence to show that it was built in a certain way. It was one bench at a time rather than just plopping a pyramid down. I just find it interesting because you start hearing about all these different types of theories out there, and I don't want to dismiss a single one, but it's hard to know what's the most reasonable and fact based on evidence, especially considering that there's a lot of people that are willing to blend certain key details just to make their theory fit. Much like a puzzle piece, instead of trying to find the right piece, you rather just trim it down a little bit or snip off the sides to be like, oh, I
Yeah,
finished it.
yeah. No, I mean, so um, when it comes to trying to wade through, and there is this mass of theories and ideas, and it's very difficult to try and know what's the what's somebody sitting in their bedroom making up a load of bollocks basically, and what is actually academic. You need to look at the journals, and there are lists of academic journals out there. You need to make sure it's being peer reviewed and it's not pseudo archaeology. So right, pyramids have got fantastic dating. I mean, amazing dating. Radiocarbon dating, there's dendrochronology because wood is preserved because of the dry atmosphere.
Some people
We've
are
got good
dating two
typological.
people at once.
So
Yeah, I said some people are dating two people. It was a dating joke.
it's outrageous. So we know the date of the pyramids, right? And we know that they're much later than the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas was an incredible cold snap that happened really abruptly, as the Earth was coming out of an ice, or coming out of the end of a glaciation period, and we suddenly went very quickly back into a glacial uh, period for a short period before then coming back out of it. Okay, and it must have been devastating at the time, and it must have devastated groups. And we're looking really at hunter-gatherers around, small pockets of hunter-gatherers around the world, and it would have been devastating. But they got through it. They survived it. Our species continued. There's no major resetting in that sense. There was no great civilization that we don't know about because of the Younger Dryas. We know, we have lots of, well, we have a fair amount of archaeology before then, and we've got archaeology after then, and we can see that the timeline right the way through it. There is no hidden society that a handful of people have worked out and the rest of us archaeologists haven't. And something else that I hear quite often is that archaeologists are covering up stuff. I was told this point blank the other day by somebody that archaeologists have uncovered a society of giants, and actually the government and archaeologists have suppressed that information, hidden it from the public. Well, fucking hell, have you ever met an archaeologist? We are the biggest gossips there ever is. Look at us on social media. We're always backbiting and bitching and trying to get one over each other. If we had found something as incredible as a society of giants, believe me, my Twitter feed would go bonkers with pictures of it. I would be, you know, reveling in the glory of having discovered something like that. You know, so we it just doesn't exist. It's kind of make believe. And
be honest here. You think I'm a balanced person, right? Like
yes,
when it comes
to
okay, just making sure before I'm gonna test the waters here. So you started saying that, and I was like, I would fucking believe it, because like, but like I said, there's the line that gets drawn with like what comes into like pseudo archaeology or pseudo anything or conspiracy theories, and the line is when they start saying the government has to keep it a secret. It's like, by time, this is why we have whistleblowers who are more than willing to expel out information on these types of things as well too. But that's such the weird only part that I can see where they like I could see their kind of perspective is the idea like they are finding giant bones. Now, I don't like a lot of people say, well, that was just a person who was really tall. I'm like, well, to think there were two different like types of like hominids back in the day, ancient hominids. There's probably more than that we don't really know of, but one creating one, which is who we are now, Homo sapiens, for instance, that is, I mean, that was formed by two. It's kind of like I don't know if this is true, but the people that survived or the people that were sitting inside caves and that were hiding when all these types of like natural kind of climate shifts and disasters started to happen, because they were afraid to go outside. Then eventually when they did go outside, it was the right time to, and we eventually built up from there. A lot of the people or a lot of the races that weren't really like the strongest survive. Neanderthals, for instance, I think there's still some lingering genetics amongst some people. For instance, I see someone with with a big jaw or like a big forehead.
Well, no, wait a second. You're getting confused between the phenotypes, what we can actually see, and genotypes, the stuff that's within our DNA. And all of us do have some degree of Neanderthal, or most Europeans have some degree of Neanderthal within their DNA, but very small amount, about 2%. And you know, but it's not a case of, you know, two species come together and make a new species. It's just this sort of ongoing process of evolution, and some species kind of just fade away, others get completely wiped out. But you know, often their genetic imprint continues on and within us. So if you looked at if we looked at your DNA, we wouldn't just be looking at you as an individual, we would be looking at all the populations behind you, all of the things that all of the people, all of the groups that have contributed to their DNA, to what is now within you.
Well, isn't it so? Are we living in a society of mutts? I would say, like, if all of us are technically mutts, for instance, because I don't think anybody
we always are.
Well, I don't think anybody predicted the fact that people were going to travel on giant wooden ships and cross to another country or another side of the world, where their ancient history is going to be different from the people's who are over here's ancient history. The next thing you know, they start having kids, and now you're having a whole bloodline where it's hard to find the ancient kind of genomes. And like, for instance, if you're looking at ancient DNA and they're able to find ancient DNA, is it somewhat similar to what we have, or are there strong characteristics that we have just dropped off of for an adaptation or evolutionary process?
In terms of populations today, it's almost identical. We are, you know, there is no such thing, genetically speaking, as race. We are one species,
yes.
And we've always been mutts. You know, we've always been, you know, a whole variety of different things. And you know, there are differences between countries in appearance, clearly, but genetically speaking, we are the same. If you were to only have the DNA, you wouldn't be able to, you know, we wouldn't have this issue of you know, racism and racial division, because actually we just all look so similar. So I mean, you know, there's a few things that comes out of DNA, and I think it's worth saying that There is no such thing as pure DNA. Right? It's just this constant ongoing process of mixing and mingling. The pot is constantly being added to and mixed around, and that's for all societies everywhere in the world. All right, there is no sense of purity, no such thing as purity. And what we're finding in terms of prehistory, we're seeing these sort of waves of migrants coming into Europe and into Britain, and replacing the DNA of the people that were there. So we can see sort of a few really massive waves of people, not necessarily an invasion, but people coming over and mixing and mingling. And we see that at the end of the Mesolithic, which Mesolithic are hunter-gatherers, not, they're the people that existed after the Younger Dryas, hunter-gatherers that sort of moved around in small groups. We can see people with ancestry which can be traced back to Anatolia and the first farming communities. We can see people with their DNA almost entirely replacing those earlier hunter-gatherers. And then later on, those Anatolian farming, those people with ancestry that relates back to Anatolia, we see them being completely replaced by Bronze Age people coming from the Eurasian steppe, so modern day Russia, basically. And we have a lot of that DNA still within our system, but we can see that the earlier Neolithic DNA had been almost entirely wiped out. And again, that's not a mass migration and a battle and people get wiped out. It's just, groups of people, waves and waves of people coming over and people going back the other way as well. And this massive mixing, and the end result is that those smaller Mesolithic populations and the smaller Neolithic populations just get so smushed around into the pot that they're hardly there at all. In fact, there's something like a 98% genetic change during those periods. So when people say, "Oh, yeah, but I'm sort of related to the people that built Stonehenge," which is what you hear from some nationalistic politicians in Britain.
You were going to say a different word. You were going to say a different word. I saw it. You said politicians. You're going to say something else.
But they can't. There is no such thing as people who can trace their racial purity back, and you just get these waves of people. Whether it's the Romans, and that was an invasion, but it didn't necessarily wipe out the inhabitants, but it did bring. The Roman world was a very diverse world which incorporated North Africa and vast tracts of Europe. And it brought in new genetics, and that again mixed into the system. And then we see it with the Angles and people from Saxony, and then we see it through the Normans and Vikings, and so on and so on.
If it's almost identical to be able to check the ancient DNA and see an exact kind of replica, I would say, within us, what doesn't that eventually get squashed out though? Like, for instance, how are like the bones that you're looking at are the bones from this timeline? Maybe it's another timeline, like I said, hinting back to the Younger Dryas thing. I'm not saying that's real, but I'm saying like what makes that theory invalid, I would say.
Well, because the populations before the Younger Dryas were really small groups of people, really small populations. And we know that because we have a number of their settlement sites that have been excavated. And then we see them continuing, even if they're being pushed out of certain areas, but continuing throughout the Younger Dryas, and we see them continuing through the Mesolithic. So, I mean, we need to be clear about that, because actually it keys into quite a lot of rather dark and nasty histories that people are trying to create a narrative which then justifies their position of superiority.
Well, so wait,
white supremacists have latched onto a lot of this.
White supremacists latched onto?
Yeah.
What part of dark history is it?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that history, right the way, you can see this through Nazi Germany.
Who's
archaeology
trying?
and
Wait, hold on,
history,
hold on, hold on. Who's trying to forget
archaeology.
Hitler? I know Germany's probably like, hey, we don't ever mention him, but I mean, there's a whole rate. That's an issue that we're still dealing with today. Not even in the archaeology field. There's people that don't believe that the Holocaust was real, and
Well,
now to understand their perspective, this is how I usually say it. If you don't think it was 6 million exactly, they definitely probably rounded up because I don't know who's, and now they're saying it was over 11 million people. They said it was 6 million Jews, and then it goes on farther from there. That's when you can start going. I doubt you counted every single one and how many were accounted for. So maybe you blended the number a little bit. That's enough for them to say that the whole thing is wrong, that it's all been a lie, or it was 200,000 people, which we know is not true. See, this is what, like, these are like things that need to be talked about. For instance, why the hell is there such, as much as you can say, and we can both agree that we're all the human species, races apart, we're all human species. There are people out there that still believe that whatever they find is their history, not the other person's. That's why you have issues with Brexit. That's why you have issues with the Rosetta Stone. That's why there's so many issues with archaeological finds, because they go, well, it's ours. Well, technically, it's everyone's. It's not just one specific area's place. So you have to get to this divide where, and honestly, my opinion, there needs to be a national museum that's not just national, it's global. It's everybody's history all in one, so we can all share it. And I think you should have curators from many different planes of existence, from all different countries all over the globe, to be at this one exact spot. We're America, basically every country that's not like Asia has the biggest issue tracking their history because they have less of a record, because if we haven't found it, or a lot of people aren't prime and caring about a lot of their origins. For instance, most people just want to worry about what tomorrow is going to be. They're more about predicting the future than the past. Asia has an account of their history. Japan does, for 5,000 fucking years. Like, we don't have that. So far we're like, well, I found this, and I think this was the original cave painting from like 373 BC. And it's like, okay, what about, like, I don't know what your family heritage is from? Well, I can check ancestry.com. Fuck those sites. They don't tell you anything.
well, I mean, this is the this is the dangers of. We talked about the historic record being written by the elite, the ruling elite. Well, this is one of the really sort of, I mean, there are many dark sides of an empire, of any
Tell me
sort of
them all.
empire. And
Tell me them all.
one of the terrible things about the British Empire is this ongoing, cutting people off from their past and having sort of raked in all the interesting artifacts and putting them in, I don't know, the British Museum, for example, and then calling that British Museum, oh yeah, but it's called the British Museum, but it's actually a global museum, and it's got everyone's, and they're all free to come and have a look at it. Well, they're not really. And actually, these groups, whether they're from India or Africa or wherever, these countries are effectively being cut off from their past because of because their artifacts have been looted. And so, yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying about an international museum, but where on earth do you put it? Unless you try and find some completely neutral zone like the moon.
You
But
build an island
create
like
a
Jurassic
museum
World.
what about actually a museum of the Earth on Moon in no country's space? Because although I say we're all human and genetically we're all the same, we do live within political borders and countries, and those are really important to people.
Well, the evolutionary, I would say, levels are all different. Like, for instance, if you get a college degree in your country compared to getting a college degree in India, even if they're master's degrees, both, they're not the same level of education because the amount of resources available there to teach you aren't exactly the same. I've had so many people
Well,
say, like, I have a master's degree in this, but I got it from India. It's like, why? It's like, well, if you look at like what their curriculum is, it's a little bit easier compared to other places that have different restrictions on stuff. Now that's going to change a lot. And I mean, it's like people in the States think because they speak better English, they can go over to China and then be able to manipulate the market and do all these types of things. And they lose their whole business because they're not living off your style anymore. You're not in the States. You're not in your hometown anymore. You're now in a different country and they know the rules and they've been born and raised it. It's a different. areas of evolution, I would say, within our brains or
Well,
intelligence
I mean,
capacities.
it's not so much about evolution. It's more to do with different societies it, do things in a different, simply in a different way, and they privilege certain things over other things. I have a number of Indian PhD students, and they're fantastic. I mean, they, no, not better, but they're not worse than somebody
No,
that's
I'm not. I'm
come
not
through the
saying.
English
I'm not
education.
saying race. I'm saying depending on where you get your degree. For instance, the best spot if you're going to be a lawyer happens to be in one of the smallest states in the U.S. because their
Yeah.
restrictions are different. It's not about the race or about the lawyer. It's
No, no,
about
no.
where they got their schooling from. If you're getting your PhD or stuff in India, their restrictions are a lot less because they don't need a whole bunch of requirements compared to the regular PhD. If you went to like Japan, would be probably the toughest, or another Korea another of Asian descent will be like Korea or China. Any of those might be harder than some of the classes in the States. Some of the states over here in the United States, some of their PhD requirements are not as heavy, I would say, compared to what state you're going from. If you're going to a Harvard in a different country, then it might be different.
There is difference. There's clearly difference between different universities. I was just making sure that we weren't talking about the intelligence levels of certain countries,
No.
because
I meant
good,
depending
good.
on the resources that are available in that country. No, that would
Yeah,
be fucking
yeah.
horrible if I was like, oh, this person couldn't learn
Yeah.
this because no, that's terrible. It's just about where you're evolving culturally, I would say, about where you're from. Sadly, I mean, if you look at like I mean, even the generations coming up, in the States have nowhere close to the amount of technology capacity of understanding of maybe someone who's using more technology in another country. China, for instance, it's all being shoved in your face. Now, the only issue is that there's a self-censorship as much as is going on in the States is happening over there as well, too. Now, I'm speaking freely here. I'm not speaking like I'm thinking every single thought through, but I'm talking about the mass amount of technology usage. And here's where I'm going to say evolution, the theory or the idea or the topic of evolution has to change. I think for so long, evolution has been based in the fact of evolving physically. And that is very, very true for most of history, I would say. But I also think evolution is now should start being based on intelligence levels because sadly, well, not even sadly. The weird part about technology being thrown in is that the amount of exposure that kids are being used to, the amount of information that's being thrown at them at such younger ages, their brains are expanding 10 times faster than they were back in the 1900s and the 2000s, for instance. A 90s kid can do half the things that a kid growing up now can do because of, first of all, the resources. That's exactly what I just said earlier about the resources in your country. If you have 5G internet, if you have all these amazing capacities, these brand new iPhones that another country doesn't have, you're going to be ahead of the fucking game, which is like a genetic race in a sense, because that enhances your evolution after a couple of generations. You're having kids that, like, for instance, my great grandparents were like, build your own house, in the middle of a snow, and then you'd have to heat nails on a tea kettle just to keep your fingers from freezing when you're hammering and you're building your own house. Try making a kid do that today. There's no fucking way that's going to happen because they don't know how to build a home. There was no need for it. So you lose that, but what do you gain? What do you gain is your intelligence level when it comes to technology, when it comes to using the internet, when it comes up to digging information. Journalism has been boosting up more and more every single generation because kids are being so used to finding things on the internet, whether it's the dark web. It's not even the dark web anymore. It's just the internet in general. That's another form of evolution, which is not taken care of physically, where you see giant alpha male, bulky style types. You're seeing more what I would call betas, like betas who are alphas in a sense, because they know how to master technology. They know how to pay their bills. They know how to do all these things. When back 20 years ago, it was just about having a cool car and a sexy chick. Now it's about having like a bank account that's sufficient, being able to pay your taxes on time, having a 700 credit score. Like the weird evolutionary shift that's happening is you're starting to see that take also an effect, not only in someone's mental capacity, but also in some physical aspects as well, too. People are less likely to work out, more about doing things when it comes to expanding their online digital footprint rather than their physical digital footprint.
No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But the thing is that it's not evolution in a sense. It's just societal change because we're prioritizing some things over others. There's stuff that, as you say, people did decades ago that none of us can do now. My dad is really handy at pretty much anything. You know, the car breaks, he could fix it. The radiator leaks, he can sort that out. The boiler goes, he'll just go and sort it out. I can't do any of those things. You know, my car breaks, I have to take it to a garage because I look at it and I don't even know where the bloody, you know, screen wash goes in. And there's just, you know, we lose certain things and we prioritize other things, so that, you know, yeah, kids nowadays are fantastic with technology. I've got two school-age daughters, and they're both got iPhones, and they're both, you know, they know their way around it. They know how the television works, and I don't. They have to show me. But you know, when the apocalypse comes, will that generation know how to survive? At least I can nap a flint. At least I can make fire.
Well, here's the thing is that imagine looking from not even in our lifetimes and not even our kids' lifetimes or not even our grandkids' lifetimes and the lifetime after that, there is going to be future archaeologists who are going to be looking at the metaverse or these types of online systems to be able to find art. That's how the archaeology is going to take place, because we don't leave a physical record anymore. We're still people doing stuff, but eventually everything's going to start shifting into another networking thing. I mean, to think it's out of the realm of possibility when it comes to space colonization. We're all just inserting our minds into technology, then having chips on multiple different satellites out there in the system that's just projecting onto a planet to what we live on. Like our physical ramifications. If I go and try and track down, and me and you go out into the field of archaeology, we know we take one of those amazing fucking walks. I see you putting up nature pictures all the time. You're a nature influencer now, and I put one of those on a shirt. And but if you take one of those walks and you go and, you know, you're able to dig and you're able to find actual remnants, a lot of the stuff now, I mean, people are loving this minimal lifestyle, less of what you have physically. Everything is now on the digital platform, where you're going to have more of an archaeological record eventually through time. It might not even be in our lifetime. It's going to be way past that, but that's kind of like the next shift. So that's what you're going to have to be basing a lot of your evolutionary kind of changes in a way, is in a sense, is that someone didn't have a record that they left on the physical plane because everyone moved over to the more artificial plane. And that artificial plane, I mean, that's just going to change everything. For instance, I didn't want to like bring us down a weird hole of like future archaeology, but in a sense, I mean, that's where it's kind of going, which leads into this idea of like, what tools are we leaving behind? The issue is that if there is another apocalypse, if there is another type of thing where the earth has to reset again, whatever generation is going to be coming up, or whatever species that is going to be coming up and trying to figure out what the hell to do, where to go, you base those off the tools that you can find. If they find a record of a certain history of something that happened long ago, we're not going to have any of that for them to be able to navigate, because everything was online. And if technology goes away, you have to rebuild technology, and you're not going to find that same door.
Yeah. No, I'm really into trying to understand what archaeology is going to be like in the future. I ran a conference over Christmas called Archaeologies of the Near Future, and it was imagining what archaeology will be like in 200 years' time. And a lot of the papers that people presented were about how people will be digitally excavating, or excavating that people's digital records to understand what lives were like.
My idea of where everything's going to eventually branch off to, especially when it comes to academia, because even though I'm not an academic, I've talked to so many that I've kind of learned the scope of the issues that really a lot of them face. So just tell me if I'm getting maybe off the mark a little bit, or if I'm hitting the nail right on the head. What I think is going to happen is that you're going to have a bunch of people who are refusing to change their theory, and they think their theory is right, and they're going to start breeding followers that are only going to believe in their theory. So a fresh kid that comes onto the internet is going to be like, well, there's not just one theory about our human origins anymore. There's now millions of theories out there. So they pick the one that they come across either first, or the one they like the most. Then they go 100% belief into that one, and then we'll never listen to the other side. That's where it's going to go. We have people that do that with politics. That's going to happen with academia. People are only going to want to find information that is in support of the idea that they like the most. And that becomes an issue. And I honestly, I like all the theories out there. I love when someone says, well, giants were real. Well, then there's this and there's this. When everyone goes down these different pathways, I like that. But I also want to know what is the basic general consensus of the public when it comes to the amount of information that we're being given to. And I think a lot of people look to news networks for those things, which are the same exact things of what I just explained. People that like the narrative that they have, and they don't want to look at the other side. You need to have an open science in a sense when it comes to that, so people can trust the science again.
I think, I mean, I think that that's where we are, because we're at the very, we're still at the very edge, the very start of this digital revolution. And I know it's been around for quite a few years, but in terms of kind of like, the history that I look, the timescale that I work on, which is thousands of years, we're just at the very start of it, really. And so we don't know where it's going. And academia and people like me and a lot of other archaeologists and other academics are still quite analog, and we're still thinking that we have some sense of, we still have some sense of an audience and a power to say things, and people will believe us because we actually do the stuff. And I don't think all of us, myself included, have really worked out that actually there is an entire generation of teenage people, later teenage people on the web saying what the hell they like without any archaeology, to fit in with, sometimes not very pleasant narratives. And they have a massive audience, a huge audience, the sort of audience that I could only ever dream of. When I talk, I usually have, go to a village hall and I'll have about 30 elderly people sat there listening to me, and they will talk to millions of people, and so things have already changed, even though we're just at the beginning of technology, and a lot of us haven't really realized that and haven't worked out that we need to get with it to try and maintain not so much an authority, but to make sure that there is a clear way through this mess of all these other voices speaking and talking about racial purity or genetic purity or giants or whatever, ancient civilizations that were once amazing and even had spaceships, but got wiped out somehow, and we were reset. All of these things which just don't fit into any of the evidence any of us have ever found in 250 years of archaeology. We need to make sure that our voice is still being heard and listened to somehow.
See, the thing is, my fear when it comes to just how society's going is on an aspect of, if we transfer everything to the digital age and you're building things in the metaverse rather than building things in the physical form, you're going to be like, this is 1,000 times easier than being out in the freezing cold trying to build a house. So then it's fun and easy. But then eventually, generation upon generation, that's going to be, oh, well, this is getting difficult. Let's turn it into something else. Then it's like a metaverse inside a metaverse inside a metaverse that it just constantly keeps getting easier and easier. Then you have soft jello people. You have people that can't do anything for themselves. You don't have, like survival, for instance, you had to worry about a lot more. I think that's why a lot of people get online and start fighting online, is because there's a sense of like comfortability in some aspects when it comes to not having to worry about like hunting for food. You just go to the grocery store and grab it. Like that's the basic hunting now. That eventually keeps going farther and farther and farther. See, when you neglect one thing, you start maybe gaining in another aspect. But if it all transfers on the metaverse, for instance, if you asked me or my great grandfather to build a house, you hand me a hammer, hand my great great grandfather a hammer, he's going to start building a house. I'm going to be like, oh, fuck, man, I don't want to do that because it's freezing cold out. I might have to take breaks and all that shit. But then you transfer that onto the online thing, I'm going to excel way past him because I know what I'm doing. But then eventually my great grandkids, they're going to be like, well, this is getting a little bit too difficult. What happens if we made a metaverse that you do half the stuff that they did on their first trial run? And then next thing you know, bam, that's that generation, then that generation. And it goes down these weird rabbit holes. See, I think
Yeah.
that could easily been me on a different timeline, but I created a show where I talk to people from all sides. Like I talk to a lot of people, so I'm able to see every different perspective and every different thing. You start getting your own kind of influx of knowledge, and once you start doing that, it's much like just studying about one specific subject, except now you have all your information in like every single basket. In some aspects, it sucks, but it kept me sucked away from being into the technology as much as I would like to be. I mean, a lot of kids my age are. Like even social media, I just post and go away. I don't want to be on it anymore. Messaging me, it's hard to be on there unless we've chatted before and I know for a fact that we're going to be planning it on this day. Then I'll be on my phone. But I don't like using it as much as kids my age. And I think you might have shifts like that. But to the major point is, as much as we have to get with it, you can't make it the only requirement. there are people out there who are still alive and still love the physical aspect of things. And when you're making, which is happening in society now, everything is being pushed to this. You wanted an electric car? Well, guess what? Gas is going to be $4 and keep going up until you get one. They're not giving you an option for, I still want to drive my car, my gas car. No, 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 no. We're eventually going to phase that out, which is going to happen. But is that necessarily the right choice? Because all you're doing is every time you're getting your food, they're giving you a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less. Then eventually there's no food there. And you're like, where's my food? It's like, well, you barely eat as it is. We had you reduced down to one Cheerio a day. And you're like, I guess you're right, but I didn't know you were doing it like that.
But that's the point where you then go, sod this, I'm going to grow some potatoes and carrots in my garden.
Yeah. Try telling someone they got, oh, do it yourself. You know what happens when the internet goes off? I fucking wait for it to turn on. I don't know how to build an internet. I don't know how to do any of that stuff. But see, everyone's jobs are online. Everyone's fun hobbies are online. Everything has to do with online. That happened in not even a long amount of time. It happened in a short period of time. Eventually, that's going to happen with way more things where you're never going to need to leave your house. They're just going to keep you inside your home. Half the people that wanted to leave their house after the past 3 years of being locked down, now most of their jobs online. It's like, I don't have to go to my work anymore. And then they're like, yeah, why did we even do that in the first place? It's all going to change. It's just, you got to pay attention to when the change is happening. And if there's things that you need to start fixing, because I think adaptation and evolution right now is we're speeding up our own evolution. And I don't think that's right. I think there's a natural process with how it goes. And I think people are more than willing to cut corners to get to the next stage of the evolution, which is like Amazon, Google, all these things. Amazon's doing shipping, they're doing food, they're doing so much stuff where eventually it's going to phase out the other markets that we used to do. Next, mom and pop shops go away. All these types of things go away. That's cutting a corner because people had money to be able to do so and people weren't paying attention to that aspect of things.
I mean, I know, I agree with what you're saying. The only thing is, I wouldn't call it evolution. I'd call it societal change or technological change. And, the thing is about saying something's evolution is that it gives the impression that it's a one-way street and it's it's unstoppable. But if you say change, then that gives scope for a change back. And, so I think that a lot of these things are changing, and we are going. It's difficult to see where it's going and how it's going to end, and some of it's not great. We're losing diversity, we're losing choice, as you say, and a handful of big corporations are mopping up, and we're kind of sleepwalking our way into it. But I'm an optimist, and I think there is a way back from it, and it always makes me laugh because universities talk a lot about sustainability, and it's kind of a real big buzzword. Pretty much everywhere talks about sustainability. This has got to be sustainable. That's got to be sustainable. One of the things that we study, or the thing that we study as archaeologists, is the unsustainability of past societies. We study that unsustainability. When a society is stable, generally there's very little to see in the archaeological record. It's when things are going catastrophically wrong or catastrophically well, if that's such a phrase, unbelievably well, and they're building, amazing things. That's when we see it. We see unsustainability in archaeology. But we also see that even though societies crash and entire settlements get wiped out, entire cultures disappear, new ones come along eventually. Humans have always endured, and we will continue to endure. We're just going through major changes at the moment, and it's quite exciting as well as a little bit scary. But we will continue, and we'll see what comes out of all of this. But in the meantime, I'm not going to stop growing my veg in my veg patch just outside the other side of that door, because I want to make sure that I don't lose those skills.
Yeah, but I think like we talk about societal change. The reason why I always used why I was saying evolutionary change is it's a kind of like they're kind of against each other in a sense. If evolution just goes in one direction and then change kind of can flop around or do a 180 if it wants to, that's kind of like what's happening. Is that, are you going to let it go to the evolutionary thing where it just phases out, or are you going to be part of that change that might bring some of it back? I think there's going to be a giant pushback in a lot of sense. People like me, people like you, that like doing things in physical form. I know plenty of people that won't get NFTs. They want real physical art of the things that they have. I think there's that small community, but sadly, there's not a lot of options for that community anymore. There's a lot more aspects for people to just transfer everything online and make it all that way, which is what I'm not pro for. I'm an optimistic and hoping that enough people will be against that idea. But eventually, if they make everything that way and you get used to it, you're not going to remember what the old style thing was. You remember it now because it's still able to be accessed now. But like the BlackBerry or those older cell phones that used to be out in the day, we don't remember what it's like to hit a button 3 times and then go do that because we have touchscreen phones. I remember when touchscreens first came out and everyone's like, oh, why the hell would you do that? I want to click a button, not just tap a screen. There were a lot of issues with it, but now we're all used to it because that's all that's available now. There's no touch old phones unless you go dig one up from the past and try and activate it. And even then, they're like, it's $1,000 a month. They're going to make sure you don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's, again, that's technological change, isn't it? And I suspect that's always been the case. We see this in the archaeological record. You see stone tools changing over time. And I always imagine when you go from, I don't know, the microliths to leaf-shaped arrowheads, you're going to have people going, well, why do we need to use leaf-shaped arrowheads? We've always done it this way. We've always produced our microliths. This is the way I'm going to carry on doing it. But eventually, the tide has changed and they do it in different ways. Not all of them are better necessarily. They're just different.
Yeah, but what happens if everything transfers online and then that gets wiped out? Then what
Yeah,
do
well,
you,
no, I think
you
that's a genuine concern. Um, there'll always be physical things, obviously, because we all need, we all need things to touch, and even our phones are physical, aren't they? But so there'll always be something physical. But I think a lot of the records, the historic records now, are online, and people are just destroying the hard copies. And yeah, it does worry me.
Well, it's
I
like
don't
my
know
it's
the
my
answer to
biggest
that.
issue with the Vatican and like a bunch of things that are holding information because you don't know what pieces you might be missing in a sense. Same thing with digital stuff. If you everything's transferred digitally online and say a reset happens or something happens where everything's lost and society has to restart again, what point are the people that are going to be looking at our history that are going to be coming up trying to figure out what to do, that are going to be, evolving and taking the same path that we are? What are they going to be able to see to not do the same exact thing? They're only going to have a certain point because then the internet's gone, everything like that. You can create the internet again, but if all the data's on the cloud, you have to have a same person in a same other universe or dimension, whatever you want to call it, that makes the cloud the exact same way, does not put one or a zero out of place. It's exactly the same to even be able to access it again. It's not like a memory card, a physical thing you can plug in and be able to see it all. It's not like that. What this is that you don't even have a memory card anymore. You have this server that's invisible that nobody can see. That's the thing, is that where does our footprint stop? Not even carbon footprint, none of that stuff. I'm talking about a legit actual copy of you, the success, the progress that you made. If like, it's my issue with censorship too. If I get a video taken down or a video flagged or removed, it needs to be on other platforms so you know what happened. But if I say, hey, I talked to Joe Rogan, you're like, where's the proof? Oh, well, the YouTube video got taken down. Nobody's going to fucking believe you because you don't have a record of it actually happening.
That's the thing. That's what we're having to grapple with at the moment, isn't
That
it?
should be your book, is that the future of humanity leading into a digital realm where we're all going to be eating paste out of a tube and inserted into technology.
I'm going to be growing carrots and potatoes. I'll be all right.
Carrots and potatoes, man. Is that all you eat? You eat more.
No, no, I eat more,
Okay,
but I can survive on that if I have to.
that's good. Do you have a water source?
Well, it's raining, rainwater.
But
I mean, it's raining quite a lot now because we were in the middle of Storm Eustace.
Storm Houston, that's a weird name for a storm.
It is, isn't it?
But when it comes to archaeology and the book that you're writing as well too, what's the one message you're really trying to get out about it? Like, what's the one thing that you really want to show people? Like, if you could give me the deep down, heartfelt, pull it out a tear jerker, what is it?
So what I want to do with this book is show that archaeology is dynamic, or the past was dynamic, and the reason that I want to show that is because archaeology looks really static. You know, when we find things, we find static things in the ground, and that's kind of like a, you know, obviously we do because the people we're studying are dead. You know, that's kind of you know, it goes without saying, and everyone knows that those people that were dead did once move around. But actually, we rarely think about the dynamism of the past, the movements of people. And so I want to put that back into our narrative. And so this is what I've been trying to do over the pages of this book, is to reanimate the past, get that movement, that sense of movement back in, the sense of big migrations, but the sense of small movements and moving with a horse, the development of the wheel, the development of roads, and get that sense of movement once again. And I think once we do that, then we can start seeing the past as a real thing, a thing that happened that we can relate to better. And it enriches our experience and our understanding of the past by doing that.
Now, can a small migration or a small movement change a giant, like have a, like what's a giant impact it could have on history? Are there any examples that you could give me?
Well, I mean, his history is made up of lots of small things. You know, lots of small movements can have a massive impact. But
Well, like
I
if
mean,
the
if I was
Trojan War didn't happen, if they didn't decide to do that horse thing, then you would have a whole different outcome and maybe a whole different path history would have went down.
Absolutely. So yeah, if I could pinpoint one thing, then it's that big migration from the Eurasian steppe, where in the Bronze Age, where we get the development of the wheel, we get the domestication of the horse and actual horse riding, because we start getting bits and the equipment, you know, the accoutrements of horse riding, and then we get the movement of people going with that. Those individually small steps created something that was absolutely massive and completely 100% changed the face of not just European history, but Asian history as well, because of course it goes the other way as well. So, you know, fundamentally changing the course of evolution.
I'll have to connect you with a past guest of mine, Jane Barker. She studies the ponies and chariots. So you guys have definitely hit it off
Oh,
on that subject for sure.
sounds good.
But when it comes to like a small change, for instance, do you know anything about the Bering Land Bridge, Bering Land Strait? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, yeah. Well, very, very little. My research doesn't come onto that, but there's been some big strides with understanding the populating the Americas.
But that's a movement though. That's a giant thing that should be recorded through history to be able to tell where your origins come from in a sense. Is that's what you're trying to do, is those type of things. So I think the first time we talked about was just moving freely, like when we walk outside or getting in touch with nature. That's a movement too, but I think a movement on a larger scale is the fact of like not only like immigrating to another country or moving across. I mean, so much gets talked about when it comes to colonialism, and a lot of it's not in the best of lights, like we say the dark history aspects of stuff too. Well, that shit's important to learn about as well, too. Not only that, but I mean, at that point, everybody's fucking surviving. Like everyone's trying to figure out what the hell to do. If you're coming to a new land, if you're coming across new people for this first time, enemy or not, friend or not, it doesn't matter. It's the movements that happen, the pathways that you take. I mean, to think that if everyone thought about every single trip they ever take in their car or wherever they go, if they think to log it down like a ship's record, what the fuck would that even entail to? Like, we don't think about doing that. Our phones might track it for us without us knowing, but we don't think about these things. I'm taking a spontaneous trip. Well, did any adventurers back in the day take a spontaneous trip somewhere, or did they have a planned destination and thought it out? Most of the time, they didn't think it out.
True. Most of the time, it was these small scale spontaneous trips, and that's what I think changes the world. Is everything one step at a time.
So those random people that decide to go to like Guadalajara and like just a Saturday night out of nowhere, those people are important.
Yeah,
Damn it.
everyone.
Damn it.
All of these movements are important.
Oh,
It's not
God.
just the big stuff; it's the small stuff. It's the small stuff that interests me more.
And if there would like your idea for academia, for instance, in archaeology, what's a good way that you've kind of understood when it comes to all these different archaeological researches or theories out there? What's a good way to be able to just stop the infighting so much? It seems like it's a lot like that with every community now. There's just a lot of people that are talking trash rather than trying to get there. And I get it. If you're spending 30 years to research something, you don't want anybody telling you, no, this evidence proves it all wrong. You're going to take that offensive. But to keep like what we were talking about earlier, where we talk about the human species as one, you would think that you would want anything to not interrupt that progress of one species trying to figure itself out. It's kind of like if you ask the question to God, God doesn't know where God came from. Humans don't know where humans came from. There's theories that your origins are on Mars or all these types of things. There's a lot of disarray and a lot of plausible things, but there's no conclusive basis of it's this 100%.
Yeah,
You look like you disagree.
well, I know I agree, but I don't know what the answer is. I think probably the answer to all the infighting is more face-to-face communication. Communication is nearly always the issue, and we've seen that over lockdown. That the more remote you are from people, the more antagonistic, but the more easily antagonized you can become and antagonistic you can become. Actually seeing someone face to face, it's amazing how quickly a lot of that drops away and you can find a middle ground.
Yeah, because it goes back to I'm still thinking about when you were saying like the archaeologists bitching on the internet. It's like I see a lot of people just taking shots at people who have been dead for a century. Like you're seeing like a lot of that. And I'm like, I get it if it's a joke and you realize this person might have been like talked or you might have learned bad about him in history. Like a lot of people talk about Caesar. A lot of people talk about just like people that have been known to be like tyrants in a sense in a very, very bad way. And I think it's interesting because if you look at today's time where everyone's talking about people who are alive today, and are in office or something like that, what's the record going to be for the people of the future? And what's going to be limited to them? The censorship that's going on. I mean, it's going to be a little bit strange when it comes to what information you're able to look up anymore. What are you even able to find out? Like my buddy Chris, who I think it's the River Mersey, is where he was finding, he was searching iron bog sites and he was finding Viking remnants. And there's a period where nobody knew where the Vikings were. Then, not even after a month, he's telling me that these people wouldn't, the zoo or museum, whatever, wouldn't look into it because they don't want to know that they have pagan roots. Then there's an article about it. And I'm like, dude, you missed your shot. He was like, I tried, but they wouldn't, like you start realizing it's like, are you willing to you can't forget the past. You can't just sit there and harp on the past. You got to end up moving forward. And that's the best thing to make sure that you're not repeating your own mistakes. But a lot of people just don't even want to talk about it or they don't want to know about it.
Yeah. Welcome to my world.
That's stressful as shit. I'm pulling my hair out thinking about it. But Jim, you give me enough of your time, man. Where can people find you? I appreciate you doing the podcast again. We'll have to do it sooner than a year. That's a long time without talking. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's really grand to talk to you again. Even as this storm is growing around me.
I hear it on and off out my window, dude. Like a minute ago, it's just raining hard. I was like, it's getting bad.
Cool.
But where can people find you, Jim?
They can find me on, if they go on the University of York website, you'll be able to search me up and all my details, contact details and everything are there. Or you can look me up on Twitter. As you say, I post about my walks mostly and the landscape around me. Occasionally my dog.
Beautiful pictures, people. Beautiful pictures of things that you can only see in your dreams. But he can see in real life. I'll link it all in the description, Jim. It's been a pleasure. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.